Hello everybody. I'm doing another video and I have to say I'm quite amazed and delighted both at the same time that I am, because if anybody is on my channel, you will see over a course of maybe 5 months, 10 months or whatever, I seem to knock out videos every couple of months, which is it sort of embarrasses me when I see the last time I actually post a video. So anyway, on a lighter note, I'm doing something slightly different this time. I want to talk about 3 famous people, well, famous or infamous, or in terms of history, and they're all related to Berlin naturally. The first one is Winston Churchill. The second person is John F. Kennedy, and the third person is Ronald Reagan. And what I'd like to focus on, what all these people have in common is they're all in Berlin. They all gave great speeches in Berlin, and generally from wherever they may be, and on their political campaigns and that kind of thing. So, and they have all great speech writers. Now, the first thing I want to show you guys is this box set, which is a CD. I think I got this at the Record and Tape Exchange. And this is all the great speeches of all the people throughout history who are noted as a result of their speeches and the content of their speeches. And if you can see in the back here, look how many speeches there are. It's unbelievable. But astonishingly, there's only a few speeches on John F. Kennedy. There's one with his brother Edward Kennedy, but the John F. Kennedy one is on his inauguration. So there's a lot to get through here, and I have to be honest, I haven't really been able to actually listen to all of these. But as I say, I've got a library, so at some point I will get to listen to them all. But yeah, this presentation, I'm focusing on these 3 gentlemen because they are noteworthy because of their speeches. So I've got a book here of Mr. Winston Churchill. Now, he's known as a great orator, and he was a champion of World War II, naturally. But there was another side to Winston Churchill that perhaps is often left out from the history books, which is that he was an imperialist. He was a person that really didn't care much for the colonies, because the British Empire, as you are, I'm sure, well aware, had a lot of colonies, and it was the biggest empire in all of human history. But this book, I haven't got to read this one yet. I bought this in a charity shop in Uxbridge. I've read a couple of pages, so the prose is really good. This is a first edition book. This came out in 1941. And so I'm sure I'll find out a lot more about Winston Churchill. But the point I want to make with Winston Churchill is I have a lot of, let's see, there we are. So, because I'm really into history, historiography, when I go out on the hunt digging for vinyl, I'll always look in the spoken word section if I can find anything of interest. So I've got here BBC Scrapbook 1940, and of course you see our man Winston Churchill here. But there's a lot of other people that were perhaps famous or infamous at that time, but now during the course of time nobody will recall their names, unless of course they are themselves into history, and they'll be able to recognise a lot of the names on this record. But Winston Churchill is known for his oratory. Now this is a cover of a picture of Winston Churchill, as we all recognise. You know, this man who's known for his B sign, and him smoking a cigar, and perhaps being seen with a glass of whiskey, and he was very good with morale and his messages on the radio, that families up and down the nation would listen to him speak. But there was, like I said, another side to Winston Churchill, and I'd like to show you this with this cover here. As you can see, it's a different picture of Winston Churchill compared to this one. So if you see this one, that's the stoic Churchill that we all recognise, and then we see a very different looking and earnest looking Winston Churchill. I've heard that he suffered from depression, and I think you get a true picture of the man when you look at this picture. He was a racist, he was an imperialist, he was a drunk, and he would get the messages from Bletchley Park, where they actually were able to intercept and break the German codes. So he knew when the Luftwaffe would start bombing London. So what he would do is he would go to Chequers. So he'd get his chauffeur to drive him to Chequers every time there was a bombing raid on London. So that gives you a clue of the real Winston Churchill, who he really was, and not what the image of what people would often think of Winston Churchill. World War II was perhaps the peak moment of his career, but there is a side of history that is often overlooked, or perhaps covered up, and that is the Bengal famine, where depending on who you talk to and who's actually studied that dreadful episode in India, was the fact that a minimum of 3 million people starved to death as a result of Winston Churchill's policies, because he really didn't care much about those people that were in the colonies at all. They were there to be exploited, and of course the British Empire did a lot of exploiting, where they would have access to the natural resources of the colonies and the cheap labour. And one of the things that they would do is that they would make the population pay a tax. So that tax was for the benefit of the British Empire. So they had access to cheap labour, and they had access to their natural resources. And during the course of the war, a lot of those in the colonies were made to join the army and fight for the British. And of course they were promised that they would get their independence, but it's a promise that was never kept until, of course, after World War II, where India, for example, in 1947 were able to get their independence. So in some respects, Winston Churchill's what Winston Churchill really wanted to do was to be able to keep the British Empire together. But it was as a result of the First World War and the Second, and perhaps more so the Second, that they were losing grip on the empire, and a lot of the colonies were sought independence from the British. So in that regard, he failed. If you ever go on YouTube, if you want to know a bit more about the empire, the British Empire, I recommend you go on YouTube and you watch End of Empire. See, I've got the book here, and on YouTube there's somebody downloaded the whole season or the whole series of End of Empire. It's a VHS transfer, so the picture quality is not going to be 4K or Blu-ray. It's not it's not going to have that crystal clear picture that we're so used to today. It's still watchable. However, all the colours won't sparkle like they normally do if you watch. If you're used to watching this pristine picture quality on your plasma TV screen. So, End of Empire. I would say this. I think Winston Churchill caused the end of the empire to accelerate. The end of the empire, I believe, was the peak of the empire was at the Boer War, when Queen Victoria was still on the throne. But I think there was it started to deteriorate, especially after the Second World War. But it was the First World War where the cracks started to appear. After the end of the First World War, that's when things weren't going the way that they wanted to, and they were desperate to hold on to the empire. But at World War II's end, that's when it became evident to everyone that the empire could not last. So, check out End of Empire. Highly recommend it. Okay. So the other thing I want to talk about is the bombing of Berlin. Now, the bombing of Berlin was a result of the orders that Winston Churchill gave Bomber Harris. Bomber Harris was known for his bombing campaigns throughout World War II, and it's a technique and something that he learned through experience from the Empire, because during the course of the British Empire, they would do a lot of bombing on the colonies, in the colonies, where they would actually use bombers to actually bomb some of the colonies if some of the indigenous people got out of hand. So it wasn't just Bomber Harris, it was like Montgomery, and there were others whose names are sort of lost to history, who would then take their experiences of what they had in the colonies and they would use them to the maximum during World War II. Now, I have a couple of books here on Dresden, and you would think, well, why am I bringing this up when this is a Berlin channel? Well, the reason being is because they wanted to cause tremendous destruction like they did in Dresden, which is this one here, and Hamburg, but they couldn't do it in Berlin simply because of the type of architecture that Berlin was created. It was created in such a way that you couldn't get a firestorm like they had in Dresden or Hamburg to destroy the city. However, Berlin was very badly bombed, not just by the British but by the Americans, but the Russians as well. So at the end of the war, the Russians were shelling the city as well as bombing it. So it was getting it from three of the main protagonists in the war: the British, the Americans, and the Russians. However, they could not destroy Berlin like they did Hamburg and Dresden. And it was the result of the orders that Winston Churchill gave to Bomber Harris to destroy most of the German cities. So when Winston Churchill got to Berlin, he actually saw the fruits of his orders, because of the mass destruction that was that you could see everywhere you went. I mean, it was a shell of a city in some places. Though some districts weren't touched, but others, especially in the centre of Berlin, it was badly destroyed. And he actually did go to the Hitler bunker, and he went down some of the steps, but then he chose to not go into the go right down into the Fuhr bunker, or the Hitler bunker, because he saw as much as he wanted to. So he only went, say, down the stairs to a certain point that he decided to turn back and go back up the stairs again, because he felt that there was nothing more to see. So as far as speeches are concerned, most of his speeches he gave on the radio, but he didn't give a speech like the next president, which is John F. Kennedy. So just give me a moment. Okay, so I've got here. So when I go looking for albums in the spoken word section, I'll always look for things that intrigue me, that interest me. And for John F. Kennedy, of all the presidents, I would say he's the only one that has come on vinyl. I mean, I've looked for other presidents and prime ministers, and the only other prime minister I'd have to say is Winston Churchill. But you wouldn't find anything on Attlee, you wouldn't find anything on Anthony Eden, you won't find anything on Macmillan, Ted Heath, Wilson, Harold Wilson, Callaghan, Margaret Thatcher even. But as far as John F. Kennedy is concerned, you find album after album after album of his speeches. And not just that, but of the intrigues of his assassination. Now, this is a play that they've done on John F. Kennedy, and this was one of the first albums that I found, and I was intrigued by it because, this is something that was put on the stage, and it was a whole presentation of the Kennedy clan, or the Kennedy Camelot, as they called it. So with this one, I have to be honest. I haven't listened to this one yet, but I was intrigued, or I am intrigued to actually hear what it's all about. But I suspect this is probably a piss take or a comedy of some sort. This is another sort of a comedy record, but the photo says a lot. We're at the Kremlin here, and we've got Khrushchev here, and I suspect that's his wife there, and that's perhaps his daughter and their children, and a cosmonaut, which is Yuri Gagarin. Khrushchev and Kennedy played a big role behind the scenes. So what you would get a lot of accusations and all kinds of intrigue as to the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Berlin Crisis, and they called the Berlin Crisis the most dangerous place on earth, and it was the one thing that for Kennedy, he was the one that was most concerned about Berlin more than the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis didn't last more than 2 weeks. It lasted 13 days, whereas the Berlin Crisis lasted for about 5 years. So a whole different ball game here. So with that, I've got the Memorial album. So that was after the assassination. I've got his presidential years from 60 to 1963. And then that was the week that was John F. Kennedy. And he gave that famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech. He was only in Berlin for 8 hours. It was June 26, 1963. 8 hours he was in Berlin, and he went round. He did a kind of a tour, and it was a sort of ticker-tape parade, and everybody came out to greet him and wave and try and shake his hand any time the car stopped, and he would greet the crowd. John F. Kennedy, in my opinion, is perhaps a star. I would say he really was somebody that could draw a crowd. He had that charm and the charisma. He was well spoken. He had a good sense of humour. Came from a good family background. Went to the best schools and universities. So he had everything he needed to be a president. And his legacy is, to this day, still potent. You know, if you mention John F. Kennedy, a lot of people will know exactly who he is. And it's a person that we need right now, because of the situation in Ukraine. We need somebody that is a strong leader that can calm things down, because we're pretty much at 60 seconds to midnight. And because he kept a cool head, and because he was in constant contact with Khrushchev, they through back channels, they were actually able to calm things down with the rhetoric, and therefore save the world practically, because it was really at tenterhooks. We were really close to Armageddon. So I think it's something that we need right now. Somebody that can speak up for the nation and all nations, to sort of calm things down a bit. And John F. Kennedy had that capability. Now, I think the last thing I'd like to point out is Ronald Reagan. So Ronald Reagan, he actually gave his speech, I think it was 1987, where he made the famous quote, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, Mr. Gorbachev, open the gate. In Berlin, just outside the Brandenburg Gate. Now, Ronald Reagan is in some ways similar to John F. Kennedy, because where John F. Kennedy was actually assassinated, somebody tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan, and he was shot at, and he was actually shot, but he survived, and he was able to continue with his presidency. So in that regard, he and John F. Kennedy are kindred spirits. Tragically, John F. Kennedy died, but Ronald Reagan was able to survive and continue with his presidency. The thing is, with the difference between, say, Ronald Reagan and John F. Kennedy is there isn't much in the way of vinyl. These are the only albums I have of Ronald Reagan. As you can see here, Ronald Reagan is called The Wit and Wisdom of Ronald Reagan. Now, if I was to play this record, you wouldn't hear anything. I mean, I don't hear anything. So you put the you play the record, put the record on the turntable, and you play it. There's no sound. There's nothing. It's completely blank. And so you've got side one, which is called The Wit, and side two is called The Wisdom. And that's exactly what it is. So any sound you hear is what you hear all around you. Nothing is coming from the record. So that says a lot, really, because you would think that you would get a speech or two from Ronald Reagan, but you don't get anything at all. And this one is a kind of like a dance track, and they've cut bits of Ronald Reagan's speech and sampled it and included it in the music. And it really is something of its time. So, I mean, I gave it a spin today, actually, before I come on. And I thought to myself, gosh, I mean, it's okay. It's novelty. It is Ronald Reagan, but that's it. You know, there isn't anything. It doesn't quite have the magic of John F. Kennedy, and I think this is my point. I don't think there's anybody out there of all the presidents that come anywhere close to John F. Kennedy, and Winston Churchill. You know, you've got Clinton, you've got George W. Bush, you've got Obama, you've got Trump, and now you've got Biden, and none of these presidents have that charisma, that strength of character, that ability to put themselves across in their speeches as well as John F. Kennedy was able to. And the same goes for Winston Churchill. None of the prime ministers have anything close to that what Winston Churchill once had, and therefore you don't get the vinyl or the CDs of any of their speeches. So this presentation is slightly different because I'm talking about these characters. And I'm gonna, in the future, I'll get more on track with Berlin, but at the moment, I think with what I've got here, I've got something that I wanted to put in on my channel, because as I didn't want to leave it like 2 or 3 months before I post something new on the channel. So if you'd like to give me a thumbs up, please do. If you'd like to subscribe, please do. That would be most appreciative. And for those that are subscribed, I thank you very much for your subscriptions. And if you've got any ideas and you want to leave a comment, please do. If you've got any suggestions for the channel, to improve the channel, let us know. And Stick, I hope you're okay. And I'd like to finish it there. So anyway, auf Wiedersehen.